and welcome to Eerie Earth. I'm your host Kieran, and I will be guiding you on your journey through the paranormal. Together we will learn about hauntings, dark tales and much more. So sit back, relax and join me as we explore this eerie earth. Edinburgh, Scotland's capital city, is home to the Scottish Parliament, the Fringe Festival, and is even the birthplace of Harry Potter. This bustling metropolis has around 4 million tourists visit its cobbled streets every year. But many do not know about the dark, malevolent past that plagues one of the most haunted cities in the world. Tales of poltergeists, vicious spectral attacks, grave robbing, murder, and even vampirism tarnish this stunning city's gentle appearance. Below the streets of the historic city sits a warren of tunnels that spans the infamous Old Town. Ancient streets lost in time, forgotten in darkness, waiting to welcome visitors once more. Tales of dark, ominous shadow figures skulking the corridor and devil worship plague the vaults. Sitting beneath the Royal Mile, the backbone of the Old Town, is a close that was covered up and forgotten. Mary King's Close, named after the famed market trader and a member of Edinburgh Council who in the 17th century worked hard to get equal rights for women on the council run by men, was a very dark and desolate place. Sunlight would very rarely pierce the darkness due to the buildings being too high. Edinburgh was the first city in the world to have tenement housing, or as we know them today, skyscrapers. Some buildings reaching 14 stories tall. The buildings were very cheaply made, being constructed from wood, which meant they bent at the top, allowing the residents on the top floor to be able to shake hands with their neighbours across the street. The council built these houses as a way to deal with overcrowding within the city. People were too scared to build their houses outside of the city walls, so the council only had one option: to build up instead of out. The rich would live at the top of the building because the light would make it into their rooms, so more money meant more light, meant nicer living. It also meant that they were away from all the muck and squalor that littered the streets below. The poorer residents of the close would either live on the street, or if they had some money they could live on the bottom floors right next to the street. Up to 10 members of one family would live in one small room, which meant there was a lot of overcrowding within the building. Because it was so dark and dank, they needed a way to light their houses, and the most common way to do this was to use lamps. The rich would use oil or sweet-smelling honey, which would help block out the foul stench coming from the street. The poor, however, didn't have such luxuries and would have to use fish oil to light their lamps, so you can imagine the smell. The smell of burning fish oil, body odour and the stench from the livestock outside was worsened by how the residents would dispose of their waste. The buildings didn't have outside toilets, sanitation or pipes for running water, so they had to use a bucket. One bucket would be used for 10 members in the family and would have several uses. If you were unlucky to be the youngest member of the family, it was your job to empty all the waste. Before 1749, you could throw your waste wherever you wanted to, but a decree introduced after 1749 meant you could only do it 2 times a day, when the bells of St. Giles Cathedral struck 10 PM and again at 7 AM. The residents on the ground floor could empty their waste into the street no problem, but for the rich who lived at the top, there was only one way to empty your waste: throw it out of the window. As they threw their waste out the window, they would shout, "Regardez-le!" which came from the French "Regardez-le," meaning watch the water. A passerby could shout, "Hold your hand!" to tell people they were passing, but if they didn't say anything, well, the result was messy. With a combination of livestock, food and human waste, you can only imagine what the street would have been like. The cobbled close was on a slope leading down the hill. At the bottom of the hill was the Nor Loch, the place where everyone in Edinburgh got their drinking water. They bathed and they washed their clothes. So all of the waste from the street would cascade down the road and end up in the water of the Nor Loch for everyone in Edinburgh to enjoy. Due to the horrendous living conditions in Edinburgh, disease was rife, from typhoid, typhus, flux and even the plague. In 1645, Edinburgh was struck with a devastating Black Death, killing over half the population of the city. The disease was carried by the fleas that were on rats, and with the conditions down in the close, it's no surprise that the disease spread so rapidly. The disease was called Yersinia pestis bacteria, and it would cause some horrendous symptoms for those infected. These would include swollen glands, unsightly and incredibly painful bulbous pus-filled boils which would appear under the arms and in the groin area, making it impossible to walk or to move your arms. The victim would encounter severe bouts of vomiting, which in many cases would result in intestinal rupturing. While there was no cure for the disease, doctors found that there was a way to make things a little bit more comfortable for those affected, albeit not a very nice treatment. They found that if they burst the boils, it made it easier for the victim to move around. They would do this by using a rod which they would heat over a naked flame and insert into the boil, bursting it, allowing the pus and the infection to flow out. Screams of agony would fill the air as the mask-clad doctor performed the horrendous procedure to cure those inflicted. The doctors would wear a long leather-beaked mask which would cover their face entirely, giving them a truly haunting appearance. Their eyes would be covered by the mask, only with small glass-covered circles allowing them to see out of. They would fill the curved beak with sweet-smelling herbs and spices to block out the repulsive stench on the close. Their tall stature was covered in a long leather trench coat that stretched down to heavy boot-clad feet to prevent the fleas from getting on their clothes. All the procedures would have been completed whilst wearing thick leather gloves to make it that much more difficult. In 1753, the Royal Exchange was built in the Royal Mile to house the market traders in the city all in one place. However, its destination meant that it had to knock down a lot of the tenement buildings in Mary King's Close and actually built over the close. The last residents left the close in 1902. Mary King's Close has a plethora of ghost stories that dates back to 1645. One tells of a man called Thomas Cathcart, who was a lawyer. In the height of the Black Death pandemic, people in the close were encouraged to leave their homes in an attempt to quell the spread of the disease. Thomas refused to leave his home. He slowly began to go insane as he claimed in his diaries that he was plagued with images of disembodied limbs and limbless apparitions of children in his home. He claimed he could see a large skinless dog sitting on his couch, chewing away at the muscle and the bone on his body. Tales of large, dark figures skulking the length of the close have been witnessed by visitors to the museum, as well as people in period clothing that they've mistaken for actors who work in the close. When they approach the member of staff to ask them a question about the close, the person disappears before them. Ghost hunters have reported catching strange female voices through their EVP experiments, seeing shadows and some even being pushed. The most famous ghost to haunt the close is that of wee Annie. It's thought that Annie was a young girl who lived on the close in the 1600s. However, there is no record of a girl living on the close of that name. The closest reference is that to be of a daughter of one Jean Mackenzie who lived on Allen Close, which ran off Mary King's. In the 1990s, a well-known Japanese medium called Aiko Gibo visited the infamous close during the filming of a documentary about the most haunted places in Britain. As she came across a dilapidated wooden structure in Allen Close, she froze in fear. She claimed that she could not cross the threshold into the 17th century building due to the amount of pain that was emanating from within. She was eventually able to enter the building and made her way over to the fireplace where she said the child was standing. She said that her name was Annie and that she was missing her favourite doll and was very upset. This really touched Aiko, and she asked the runner of the show to head up to ground level to go to one of the tourist shops and buy a doll for the little girl. He did so, and when he returned with the doll, Aiko placed it by the fireplace. She said, as long as the doll stays in the room, her spirit will no longer remain. Visitors from all over the world who have heard the story have been bringing down toys and dolls, sweets and chocolates to leave for wee Annie. It got to a point where the toys were getting too much, and that the museum needed to ask people to stop leaving the toys for the ghost. While Mary King's Close is an atmospheric place, it's not the only hidden gem that sits below the streets of Edinburgh. On the opposite side of the Royal Mile, one would find Southbridge, a monumental but flawed 18th century bridge constructed of 19 separate arches. The bridge was built to link the Old Town with the university building in the south side of the city. The construction was completed in 1788 and was deemed appropriate to allow someone of standing to cross the bridge first, and this responsibility fell to a well-known judge's wife. However, mere days before she was due to cross, she died. But a promise was a promise, and the first body to cross that was of the deceased woman. Locals were shocked and claimed that the bridge was cursed and refused to cross it. But that didn't last long. Businesses began to build on the bridge to take advantage of the passing trade, and they would build their basements into the arches, creating dark, damp, airless vaults. The arches were used by the businesses such as tanners and butchers. Tavern owners would store barrels of beer within the stone arches. However, construction of the bridge was done on a very tight budget, which resulted in the bridge not being sealed properly. The weather in Scotland has always been unreliable, but heavy rain meant the arches flooded and got damaged by water that would seep through the stonework, damaging the business's goods. Very quickly they moved out, leaving the arches empty to allow the poor and the desolate to move in, calling it their home. These included immigrants, Highlanders who were affected by the Highland clearances, and even body snatchers. The darkness of the damp vaults are full of ghostly tales that have plagued the underground tunnels for many years. Tales of a large shadowy figure called Mr. Boots has been known to stalk visitors, follow them around, and even bellow, "Get out!" It's thought that he killed a woman and stashed her body in his house, and when visitors come to the vault and stand in the place where he stored the body, he gets very angry. He is thought to also go by the name The Watcher, who was an 18th century slum landlord who is said to be seen to wear a red coat. Heavy footsteps are heard before he is seen. A poltergeist is said to haunt the vaults, attacking people, throwing stones at visitors, but many believe there's trying to scare people off as he doesn't want people in his vaults. Coming up on Eerie Earth, I will be joined by Annabelle, who works for Auld Reekie Tours in Edinburgh. They conduct guided ghost tours around Edinburgh, even taking visitors down to the depths of the dark vaults to tell them the stories of the past residents and the ones who are still there. She will be telling us of her experience from within the infamous Southbridge vaults. If you ever find yourself in Edinburgh and you're at a loss as what to do, I would highly recommend that you go to visit one of the vaults and go on a tours with Auld Reekie Tours. You can book a tour at www.auldreekietours.com. That's www.auldreekietours.com. Or if you find yourself in Edinburgh, you can just head to the office where you can book a tour there. They have a very good talent of making you feel comfortable while making you feel scared at the same time. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can do by following us on Facebook at facebook.com/Eerie Earth, or you can follow us on Twitter at Earth_Eerie, or you can follow us on Instagram at Eerie Earth Official. If you want to get in contact with the show, you can do by emailing me at eerieearth@hotmail.com. Thanks very much for listening, guys. Bye bye for now.